Namaste. I am your host, Sonal Sher, and I welcome you to this conversation, Tantra Finally Explained, which is part of the Hindu Women's Festival 2021. Our panelist today is Pritesh Patel, originally from West Bromwich in the Midlands. Pritesh is now based in London and works as an agile coach in fintech. In his spare time, he helps run the British Hindus Instagram page, and over the past year has contributed to a series on British Hindu history. In addition to Hindu history, Pritesh has a keen interest in Hindu temple architecture, iconography, and rituals. Hi, Pritesh. How are you doing this morning?
I'm really, really good. Yeah, I'm great.
So before we begin, can you tell me how you've come to understand Tantra? Because it's a very, very vast, deep topic.
Yeah.
So tell us a bit.
So I'm still understanding it. So like you said, I'm interested in all things Hindu, particularly rituals and practice. And growing up, I always found like our rituals are fascinating, our gods are really colorful, but the stuff I was reading in the academic books and in the media didn't match up with my experience. There's a lot of negativity about our tradition, and my experience of it is really fascinating and positive. And so I've been on a lifelong journey to try and make sense of this vast jungle of what is Hinduism. And, you know, Tantra is something that I've keep coming across and stumbling across, and so it's a lifelong journey. This is a vast topic, as you said. I'm not a scholar, I'm not even a proper practitioner. There are people more knowledgeable than me. I'm just sharing what I've learned over the past 30 years and giving a sort of snapshot overview, and I think I can do that at a high level.
No, I mean, that's brilliant. So we should start with a disclaimer, like you said, because there are people who spend their entire lives trying to understand what the path is. So what can you tell us about Tantra in a nutshell?
Okay, so there's a lot of debate about what this is. If you read academic books, there's a huge discussion about just the definition. If I have to sum it up, it is a vast and diverse knowledge system of spiritual disciplines. And it's based upon a set of texts, which are huge and broad, and loads of lineages that carry this knowledge through. The focus of this knowledge is very much around practice, and those practices are based on ritual and meditative practices. And it's very much about applied knowledge. So there's elements of philosophy in it and theory, but it's very much about doing something. And that doing is about bringing a form of inner transformation. So like all the spiritual practices in Hinduism and Buddhism and Jainism, this is all about changing part of yourself, improving yourself, making yourself more divine or making yourself more knowledgeable. And the sort of underlying philosophy of these practices is this assumption, which again is not just about Tantra, it's broad to the entire Indic tradition, that divinity is part of everything. It's within us, it's in nature. And so tantric practices are about awakening the higher knowledge, the divinity that lies dormant in us. Now, the use of Tantra is very diverse and versatile. So they can be used for moksha, for attaining liberation, but tantric practices can also be applied to improve your worldly life, you know, to have a better family life or to become more wealthy. So that's it in a nutshell. So it's a ritual-based practice system.
Yeah, so essentially about Hinduism, what we understand is that we have all these different pathways which lead to moksha, which lead to self-realization, you know, absolute consciousness, whatever you want to call it. And Tantra is actually one of the pathways, a sort of road, and you can actually take different tantric pathways towards that goal. So what kind of practices are typically involved in this?
Okay, so again, this is, vast set of practices, but if I have to boil it down, there are, I would say, about 3 fundamental ingredients common to most tantric systems. So the first sort of facet of it is a concept of a devata, which is a specific god or goddess. And that god or goddess, Devi or Devta, has a dual purpose in Tantra. They're the goal and they're the means to the goal. So the goal is that they embody certain principles. We mentioned moksha, yes, like Shiva represents moksha, Saraswati represents knowledge, for example. So a practitioner chooses a deity that matches their being, that matches their goals, that matches the outcomes they seek to get. And then they use that devta as a guide, as a helper to get to that principle. So the whole process of the sadhana, the practice, is to become one with that devta or that devi, realize that and become them, if that makes sense.
It's the concept of having an Ishtdev, that's the word we use.
But
Yeah.
Ishtadev is very specific on your chosen deity. So do tantric practices. For example, I'm from Gujarat. We have a lot of business people who worship Goddess Lakshmi because they want wealth. And that may not necessarily be the Ishtadevata. You might have a time bound of worshipping one divinity. But then, yes, everybody has an Ishtadevata. Everybody has their chosen deity who they vibe with and they resonate with.
So that's essentially what you're saying. It's sort of, it's your character, your being, and something that you resonate with, and that's the path you essentially take.
Correct.
Okay.
So that's sort of facet number one, devta. Now, the way those devtas are expressed, we have murtis and various representations, but the primary representation is through something called a mantra, which is a syllable. And it's a set of syllables that may not make any sense, or they may be in the form of a prayer. But that is the form of that devta in a sound vibration. So when you utter that mantra, that devta is present, it's there right now. And practicing that mantra, chanting that mantra, understanding that mantra helps you realize that divinity within. So, we say this in a lot, you become what you say, and the mantra is part of that. And then facet number 3, these mantras come down through lineages. So this is a huge aspect of Tantra, this idea of something called a diksha, initiation ceremony. So a practitioner goes to a guru who has practiced that mantra, who has understood that devta, who understands the science and the technology of this system, and they receive the mantra if they're qualified, if they've got the right level of purity, right mindset, and that guru gives them the power to unlock that mantra. So we could be chanting mantras right now and it'd be like banging our head against a brick wall because we're not really unlocking that power. So they're the 3 things: devta, mantra, and diksha. And most tantric systems use those tools. Then in addition to this, there's a whole set of like practices like pujas that we do. Everybody knows what a puja is. Yagnas, which is fire ceremonies. There's these geometrical designs, which are representation, mandalas and yantras, breathing exercises. It's vast, right? We could have a whole talk on just the sort of practices. But in a nutshell, that's how Tantra is performed.
That's wonderful. I think what's happened is the translation sometimes, when we try and translate all these disciplines into English, we lose a lot in translation. So a lot of the time people sort of say, oh, mantra is just sort of a chanting or it's an incantation. It's actually not that. It is the vibration, it's the sound we make when we actually say those words. So one of the things that I wanted to ask you, and I think kind of most people want to know, is Tantra is quite often misunderstood as one of the sort of aspects of our tradition. So can you explain some of the misunderstandings and why they exist?
Cool. Okay, so there are 3 misunderstandings, and I've had to get my head around this, right? And so the first misunderstanding is that Tantra is a school or a separate body within Hinduism that is somehow sort of anti the orthodox, or like away from what is considered normal. And so this misconception arose in the sort of 1900s and sort of early 1800s, rather, when Indologists came to India. They were trying to make sense of this jungle that is the Indic traditions, and they couldn't quite get it, and that there's all these interconnections between these different practices and philosophies and ideas, and they sort of created this notion that Tantra is separate from everything else. And in the same way, they went, well, Buddhism versus Hinduism, which is not actually true. There's interconnections. So as I've explained, Tantra is a set of disciplines, and it's the way in which the Hindu tradition, the Buddhist tradition, the Jain traditions are expressed and practiced, right? In the same way, we have yoga, right? They're ways of practicing our philosophy.
Absolutely.
Vedanta, which is philosophy. And these, if you like, practices, these horizontals cut across the verticals of all the traditions. So I'm going to show you some images now, which kind of explains it. So I'm going to share my screen. So we have Tantra in Jainism, right? Which people would probably not associate with Jainism. So here we've got an image of a goddess called Padmavati in a shrine which is from my native area, Gujarat or Rajasthan.
Beautiful.
And she's worshipped with Jain tantric mantras, right? So it's a Jain tradition. These are some Tibetan Mahayana Buddhists from all the way up in the Himalayas.
Yeah, Mahayana actually went from Kashmir.
Yes, yes. So you're a Kashmiri, and
I am, yes.
Yes, which is the home of one of the great tantric schools. So these guys are creating a mandala. They're doing some sort of, it's a meditative exercise where they're using sand to create this intricate design. And then the whole point of it is that they meditate, they focus. And once they create this, they then brush it aside, which is all about the philosophy of impermanence. And this tradition went all the way to Japan. So you've got Tantra in Japan, in Mahayana Buddhism. I'm now going to go all the way to South India. So this is the Mahaswami of the Sringeri Sharada Peetham in Karnataka. And this monastery was set up by Adi Shankaracharya, one of the great philosophers of Sanatana Dharma. Most people associate Shankara with philosophy, with Vedanta, with like high intellect. What people don't realize, he was also a tantric guru. So he went to Kashmir and he wrote something called a Saundarya Lahari, which is a hymn on the goddess and the beauty of the goddess. And every day, the descendants of Shankaracharya perform a puja. And in the puja, they worship a shivling. And if you see in the image there, there's a little red stone. And that red stone is a Shri Yantra, which is a geometric representation of the goddess, which I've shown here on the right. And this puja is performed every day. And this puja uses Vedic mantras, so Purushukta, Shri Shukta, hymns from the Vedas, but also tantric image as well. So this is not separate to Hinduism. It's very much part of the everyday, the DNA of our discipline. And you can't separate Tantra from Hinduism or Buddhism or Jainism. And it's all
absolutely. Absolutely. I think when we were having a conversation previously, we mentioned that Hinduism is this massive tree, with roots that go very, very deep inside, and you can't just pick a leaf from a tree and just say this is Hinduism. The leaf is definitely that, but you kind of miss the tree, and that's what happened when those Indologists came to India. They just couldn't understand how something could be so diverse, from completely opposite ends, because we are allowed to question our beliefs as well, and be the same. So I think that's where sort of the problems start to arise. And okay, I'll let you carry on with this. It's a beautiful image.
So I'm going to leave this image because I do like this monastery, and they do a lot of good work in the south. So that's misconception number one, that it's a separate school. Now, misconception 2 exists mostly in the West now. So misconception 1 is more in academic circles. Misconception 2 is, if you Google Tantra right now, you'll probably get some images that I can't really show before 9 o'clock on a Sunday morning. It's Tantra equals sex, right? And this whole industry has arose in the Western world, where people are selling these like massages and like sexual practices and selling books about how to improve your sex life. And for Westerners, Tantra equals sex. Now, this misconception has come about there is a nugget of truth here. Like any stereotype, there's some truth in it. So whilst most of Tantra that we recognize is stuff like what the Swamiji is doing, pujas to murtis and havans and etc., there is a subset of tantric practices called the Vamachar, which is the use of substances and practices that in ordinary Hindu society are considered taboo. So things like meat and fish. Meat and fish is not that much of a taboo in places like Kashmir and Bengal.
No.
In places, and in parts of South India. But probably more radical is the use of alcohol. And the use of sexual practices, and then going into the cremation ground and meditating with dead bodies. And most Hindus don't understand this, and most people in the West don't understand this. But the sort of basic use of these things is it's for a very subset of practitioners who are doing a very specific type of discipline to advance in a specific way. So the use of sex, for example, is for very advanced practitioners to learn how to remain in control in a state where you lose control. It's a weird concept to get your head around. The use of alcohol, for example, the ability to drink alcohol and not get drunk. These practices, again, there's a big disclaimer on them. It's not for everyone. And the people the lineages that practice these things, they don't give it out to everyone. It's only for very, very advanced practitioners for a fixed set of time. The West, however, sort of focused on this, took it and made this into this big sort of misconception.
I think like what's happened with yoga now, it's exactly the same thing with Tantra as well. And you were quite right when you said that, you know, when you Google, the first thing you get is tantric massage, and you get all these people who claim to be practitioners who have absolutely zero idea of even what the word means, what it actually implies. And like everything, you know, you're not going to go into a hospital and start treating people and just say, you know, I just saw a YouTube tutorial on how to become a doctor. And that's essentially what people in the West are doing. These are very, very, very high level practices. And I'm obviously going to repeat it just so that it goes in, that these are only for adepts. These are only for very, very few people who choose to take that path. And then as far as I sort of wanted to kind of notice the fact that you've said about people go to cremation grounds and they rub sort of, you know, the ash from the dead bodies. But what we have to remember is Mahadev is actually covered in ashes. That is what he shows us, that everything is impermanent. You are going to die. And he lives, when our Lord lives in a shamshan, then, you know, that's effectively what he's telling us. So that's actually the path they're following.
Absolutely. And just on some of those like slightly left field practices, a lot of the time, like particularly in the Kashmiri tradition, they don't actually engage in those practices. They do it through meditation. So there's symbolic uses of them. So, you know, in this tradition, they don't use meat, they use pieces of ginger. So the West doesn't get that. They don't get the nuance, and they sensationalize that tradition to make money, and like they've done with yoga. So that's misconception number 2, which is the Western notion. Now, if we go all the way to India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, in our homeland, and you say Tantra to just a man on the street, they've got another stereotype, and this is this stereotype. Where's my screen? And it's a guy sitting in fire doing some sort of black magic and concocting potions, and people have got this suspicious and fearful view of Tantra. Again, this has a basis of truth in that, as I said earlier, you can use Tantra for all sorts of reasons. Like it's meant to be used for moksha. You can use it to attain wealth. You can become really knowledgeable, like we do with Saraswati Puja. There are some people that misuse the power for their own selfish reasons, and they use the energies to manipulate other people, to gain power that they shouldn't have. And so there are people who engage in black magic in India. And, you know, I'm from rural India, where there are a lot of people who are engaged in these things, and there's a lot of superstition. They are a minority. They are condemned in the scriptures, you know, because they're doing things that is against Dharma. But unfortunately, Bollywood and particularly
I was going to say Bollywood has an absolutely large role to play in this. This image that we're seeing right now is the stereotypical image where, you know, just the most heinous crimes are committed under that you know, that umbrella of Hinduism. And I think that's Bollywood has actually caused a lot of damage to the word Tantra.
And even the word tantric, like most tantrics, there's no such thing as a tantric. It's a sadhak. You know, I'm a practitioner. I'm a disciple. I'm a shishya of a guru. Word tantric, it's been created by Bollywood to create this villain. You know, Amrish Puri. Is it Om Puri or Amrish Puri? Amrish
Puri.
Yeah. So, remember the film Nagin when I was a kid?
Yeah. I think all of us, at least my age, do. Yeah.
So I hope I busted 3 myths that it's not a separate school. Sex is like a subtle, small part of it, and it's not about black magic. It's a really sophisticated tradition of self-realization and meditation.
That's wonderful. So my next question is, you know, because this is about femininity, and we were talking about sort of how women feature in Hinduism. So how does Tantra relate to the discussion of Hindu ideas of femininity and womanhood?
Fine. So again, I'm going to answer this in 2 parts. So the role of divine feminine and the role of worldly women and participation of women. So let's pick up the first.
We get rid of the tantric Baba.
Yeah, let's get rid of him, and let's get some nice image of goddess.
Yes, let's get something nice. That's beautiful.
So and this is not just about Tantra, this is broader, right? I think we've discussed this now, Tantras and Hinduism, and it's all connected, right? So our tradition is one of the only remaining knowledge systems in the world where we worship goddesses, right? Where the divine is shown as a female, and Durga is the epitome of this principle. We have this goddess who the gods sought help from. She emerged from their body and she went and saved the day, right? And goddesses are, when you look at the history of Hinduism, the earliest archaeological remains are from Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, where we have female forms, we have goddesses. Every single tradition, there is a goddess, right? So I grew up worshipping Krishna. Right next to Krishna, we have Radha. We can't do Krishna puja without Radha. You go to a Shiva temple, and there's goddesses surrounding Shiva in subtle form. Jainism and Buddhism, they have goddesses. So the entire tradition is about the goddess, and the goddess is part of the tradition. And there are goddesses found in various texts, not just the Tantras, but the Tantras took the concept of the divine feminine and took it to the next level. So we have a whole range of really interesting goddesses like Durga and Kali and Chinnamasta and Chamunda, and they're doing all sorts of, weird and wonderful things. And really, through them, we see the full range of human emotion and human experience. And so there's a real celebration of the goddess in Tantra. But again, I want to put a disclaimer. Tantra is more than goddess worship. There are Vaishnav Tantras, there are Shaiva Tantras, but this tradition has celebrated and elevated the goddess. Now, taking it back to sort of philosophy, because we could talk about the goddess all day. One of the ideas, again, in Hinduism, which is really seen at the forefront in Tantra, is this notion of the dual nature of divine as masculine and feminine, right? So these are some interesting goddesses. So this is an image of Ardhanarishwara. It's a form of Shiva, or depending on if you're a goddess worshipper, a form of the goddess, which shows divinity as half male and half female.
This is one of my favorite images from sort of, our Hindu pantheon.
Yeah.
Sort of just, yeah.
And they're equal, right? And so the notion behind this is that there is one ultimate truth. I'm not going to call it God, because that word is loaded. There is this principle that cannot be known, that cannot be described. And in order to create the world, this being, this Brahman, becomes principles, right? It manifests as two.
Yeah.
And those two are Shiva and Shakti, right? Or if you're a Vaishnav, Lakshmi and Narayan, yeah? The masculine, the archetypal masculine, and the archetypal female. And they work together to create this whole universe. And without going into all the philosophy, Shiva is seen as this inert, sort of still, stable principle of higher consciousness. And he doesn't really do anything by himself. And he needs this dynamic goddess, this Shakti, a bit like the women in our families, to make things happen.
So it's the same principle of matter and energy. When matter is static, and unless you sort of get matter and energy together, nothing really happens.
Yes.
And I think something beautiful about the whole Shakti and Shiva dynamic is that, and in all Sampradaya I can say, is that we always sort of say Radha Krishna. We always kind of actually, we say Sitaram. We always actually precede the Devi. Always precedes the Lord, which is I think lovely. So yes, we will just carry on. I just sort of wanted to interject there.
And look, you're from Kashmir. You are from the place which really took this idea to the next level. And there are goddesses, and sorry, the Shiva Shakti principle is very much part of the tradition you're from, so you're familiar with it. And you be familiar with the fact that you can't worship Shiva without Shakti. So whenever there's a Shiva temple, there has to have somewhere an image of the Devi there. In South India, you have these huge cities where there's one end of the city, you have the goddess temple, and then you move a few blocks down and there's the whole Shiva temple. They're both together. In the worship of Vishnu, you have to worship Lakshmi. In the goddess-centric tradition, so when we're worshipping Kali, for example, we have to worship her Bhairava, her male counterpart. So you can't have one without the other. And this has a sort of real profound impact on the way we think about gender, that men and women are different, but we need both of them to make the world go around. And it's their union and their cooperation that makes society work.
Absolutely.
And in the tantric practice, like, this has been taken to another level, like a really beautiful level, where these gods are not just remote beings that live in Hindu heaven, Kailash or Vaikunt. they're present inside us. So Shiva and Shakti are in our bodies, they're in our being. And the tantric rituals are all about awakening the Shiva and Shakti principles inherent within us. And so there's a whole, again, this is another topic. There are meditative techniques that people.
So I think for Hinduism, the Western lens of feminism, how we everybody, the Western society, dominant society views feminism, isn't actually how Hindus see the divine feminine as. It's absolutely not that. It is not about, this is equal. It's actually about celebrating the differences that actually are within men and women, or Shiva and Shakti, and working with them and actually celebrating those differences.
And on celebration, so like this is this is something I've grown up with in my community.
I have as well.
Worshipping little.
Yes.
So this is met in Bengal, and you've got these monks on Durga Puja worshipping this little girl who's the form of the goddess. When I was a kid, I used to get really jealous of all the girls getting honored. Why am I not getting honored? And after this puja, they get money and they get clothes, and all the boys are like, "What? Why are we not involved?"
Yeah. It used to happen to me. I would think not this elaborately, but we actually have this. We kind of get our feet washed and get money, which is great.
The tantric system, you worship these goddesses in the temple. You worship the goddess within you, and then there are rituals where women are put on the pedestal and offered puja. So we have Kumari Puja. There is a tradition of something called Suvasini Puja, where married women are worshipped as Parvati. There are some traditions of something called a Dampati Puja, where husband and wife are Shiva and Parvati. So, the women are embodiments of the divine, and we acknowledge that. And, no other tradition, I think, in the world does this, where this would be blasphemous in some traditions to equate.
Oh, absolutely. I think on Dampati Puja and how everything always comes back to our own selves is in the Kashmiri wedding, in our Kashmiri tradition, when we are having all those rituals. One of the rituals is called Posh Puja. Posh is flower, and Puja, So the bride and the groom, everyone who was attending the wedding, every single person, there's no, even the elderly, they come and they actually offer flowers to the bride and the groom, and because they are viewed at that point in time as Shiv and Shakti, Shiv and Parvati. So we actually worship them at that point. Wow. As so that little ritual is called Posh Puja, and everybody does that. So usually, if you get sort of see typical Kashmiri wedding photos, you will have the little kind of 2 mounds of flowers, where there's literally tons of flowers being kind of offered to them. So yeah,
it's amazing the thread that exists throughout our tradition. Because in Gujarat, when the wedding barat comes in, the bride and groom are seen as Lakshmi and Narayan. It's a similar concept. And when my sister got married, my dad had to worship my brother-in-law as the embodiment of Vishnu, because my sister Lakshmi. So it's like these threads that exist throughout our tradition. We've got so much more in common than different.
No, it's about realizing the divine within everyone. And I know we are sort of frail and we can't actually do that sort of with everyone. And, we always have our likes and dislikes, but that is essentially what these teachings are for, that, there is that element, that little spark within us.
Brilliant. So, coming on to the us then, so we've talked about the sort of divine feminine, the idea of how Hinduism has elevated the role of God as a woman, if I can say that. But the second thing Tantra's done is given space to women to participate. So there are a lot of stereotypes that Hinduism is patriarchal, and we hear terms like Brahminical patriarchy. And when I was growing up, it was the women doing the puja. My dad never touched the temple. It was my mom doing the worship.
No, it's absolutely the same as well. And actually, if you look at sort of throughout the entire world, it is actually the women who carry on customs and traditions. A child actually learns customs and traditions at home from their mother, from their grandmother. So I don't understand where this term has come from, to be perfectly honest. I haven't seen it.
I think it comes from a very narrow view of our scriptures. So look, there are traditions. So for example, the Shankara tradition, which say only men of certain communities can receive the sacred thread and they can access the Vedic learning. However, what they will say is women can get initiated through Tantra and people like
Mm.
me who are not Brahmin can get tantric initiation.
Mm.
And I think that's why we don't understand Brahminical patriarchy, because Tantra has given scope for people of all communities to participate in ritual. And when Hinduism went to Southeast Asia, these places became Hindu through Tantra. So Tantra was used to assimilate the local Balinese gods into Sanatana Dharma.
Mm.
So we've got loads of traditions which people don't even know about, where women and men get something called diksha. They get the initiation. They
Yeah.
form part of the community. And in these communities, if you ask them, like, what's your attitude towards like the Brahmins and the Vedic rituals, they were like, we respect that, but that ritual is basic. We're going to the goddess. We're doing higher rituals. We don't need
Mm.
the sacred thread. And that's an attitude I had in my community, where people were doing devotion. They're like, why do we need a sacred thread when we can just worship Krishna directly? We don't need the rituals. But there is a concept of tantric initiation, and most people recognize some of the figures here.
Yeah.
Vivekananda is one of the greatest Hindus in our lifetime. His guru was a priest, a very poor Brahmin called Ramakrishna, and he's sitting in the middle. And he was a priest in the Kali temple. He's known for being a Vedantin, but he was a very famous tantric. And there were
Yes.
two women that were very important in his life. So the first woman, who's not shown here, was his guru, who initiated him into the tantric ritual in order for him to do the Kali Puja.
Mm-hmm.
So he got, and it was a formal ritual. He'd spent time practicing and meditating with her. The other woman who was important in his life was his wife, Ma Sharada Devi.
Mm-hmm.
And after Ramakrishna passed on, she became the head of the sect. And Vivekananda used to send his disciples to go and get initiation from Sharada Devi. So in Shakta Hinduism, not only are women allowed to take part, women become gurus, and women are seen as being higher than men. If you have a guru who's a female, you're getting the initiation from the Devi herself. So we've got this whole tradition of women being honored and elevated and given preferential treatment to women. But there are traditions where in the tantric tradition, which are for men only. So recently we had this whole hoo-ha with the Ayyappa temple, where the deity there is all about celibacy and celibate. And so women don't take part in that because it's not vibing with them.
No, I think it's about emphasizing the diverse nature of Hinduism and how huge it is.
Yeah.
So if there is going to be a sampradaya or a ritual, where Devi is worshipped, for example, Ramakrishna, he worshipped Kali. There are going to be sampradaya, there are going to be pathways where it is only meant for certain people, for men, not for women. And if you're a celibate, then definitely not women. And there are some rituals that we perform that are meant for women only. So I think it's a practice, because we've sort of we're living in a world where everything we look at needs this sort of justification from a Western perspective. We try and sort of frame it into a very, very narrow little box, and I think we need to sort of just break free from that little box that we've put ourselves in. Hinduism is definitely this massive branch tree, and I think we need to learn. So thank you very much. I think people might have a lot of questions after this. And I would you recommended a book. Was it what was the book you recommended earlier?
So there is a gentleman called Arthur Avalon. I can't remember his full name. That's his code name, Arthur Avalon. So if you just Google Arthur Avalon, he's written loads of books on Tantra. He was a Westerner, but he actually understood the tradition, and he translated some of the texts into English. And so if you want to understand just Google Arthur Avalon, and you'll find these books under that pseudonym. Can't remember his name again.
That's fine. I think when you sort of Google, one of the people I would sort of recommend slightly deeper is Abhinav Gupta, and you can actually read Tantra Loka as well, which again is sort of like a deep dive. If you want to listen to YouTube videos, which can sometimes, depends on how you take in information, you can listen to Swami Lakshmanju.
Yeah.
who does really, really good sort of, there are some, there are not many people left, but there are a couple of people who are still sort of taking his teachings, and it's probably a good way to start your
Absolutely.
learning.
I've heard of, so I've read some of Lakshmanju as well. Fascinating guy. There's also the Ramakrishna Mission. So they've written like really easy to understand concepts in English, and they've got
The Vedanta Society again they obviously deal with a completely sort of different branch of Hinduism, but again there are some talks there that do talk about Tantra, that talk about sort of Kashmiri Shaivism as well. So I think that's really, really good. Those are some good talks to follow. So thank you very much. It was wonderful to talk to you, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you very much. So yeah, namaste.